Hi, I'm Dr. Allison Veit, and welcome back to Ask Freudina. In this first season, we're dissecting common situations that people enact and how to avoid them. In this episode, we're looking at the priest and sinner enactment. As always, for a more detailed theoretical explanation of this episode's theme, feel free to listen to episode 4 of Freudina's Shrinkfink, which should be right next to this episode in your podcast player.
Hi. I had a quick question about this boy I've been talking to. Basically, I really like talking to him. He's a really sweet guy, very smart, very funny. But sometimes when we're talking, he becomes really self-conscious and insecure and will start being a little obnoxious or making some jokes that are like either inappropriate or just rude. And I can tell that he isn't doing this because he really thinks it's funny or because he really means it. He just gets very inside of his own head. And I was wondering if there's a good way to tell him that, you know, he doesn't need to be insecure around me without making him even more insecure by pointing it out. I don't know if you have any advice. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hi, caller. I chose your call because it doesn't have any particularly salient or crazy or unusual features, but just because it's the kind of call that I get so often that I think it's really common, and I want to talk it through, even though it really doesn't sound like a big deal. It seems to me that these are enactments, small enactments, that are happening over and over, very often in gendered ways, but not always, throughout our culture. And by the sound of this call, you're actually pretty young, and it would be wonderful if you could see this pattern happening with yourself right now so that you can sort of change it for the rest of your life if you so desire. So I'm going to try to talk it through with you. Today's episode, as you know, was about one person being the person who does something wrong and the other person being the one who tells them that it's okay. I've used the model of a confessor and the person who confesses, because I think many people think about priests and those that come for absolution. But a more minor view of the same paradigm is seen in your call. And I know that's a funny kind of thing to say about a guy and a girl who seem to have a budding romance. And why the heck am I interfering here? What the heck has he done to make you absolve him of sin? Doesn't sound like he's done anything at all. I'm bringing it up because it's really the same kind of paradigm, the same kind of enactment. This boy is insecure, yes, and he's having a lot of trouble with self-esteem, yes. And there's an interesting thing happening, because rather than hiding it from you and becoming sort of full of himself, he's narcissistic and full of himself in some other way. He's requesting your help, kind of ensuring your help by making himself pitiable in some way, and then treating you poorly in a way that I don't think you've quite understood. You're going to be the rescuer here, where you're rescuing him from his own moral badness, and you're going to bring him around to be good. And I guess I'm hoping you're hearing what I'm saying, that there's something in this that's very manipulative, that the more he says negative things about himself, he can continue to sort of be those negative things and not have to see that he himself has to change and do things better in order to become a better kind of human being. And in fact, he's gotten you so twisted inside that you're wondering what else it is that you can do in order to change things so that he feels okay, as if there's something you can do to change things, when in fact, it's been the pattern throughout history. When one person, it's often the male, has some ego problem, feels bad about himself, they get caught up with females who keep on trying over and over and over to make them feel good. This pattern doesn't work. I think you kind of sense what I'm saying, that there's not a darn thing that you can say to this guy that's going to make him feel okay. Can you even find the magic words? Because if you could, I think you would have said them. So the question to you, dear caller, is not why are you with this guy or interested in this guy, but in what ways are you getting satisfaction or joy out of potentially being the person who rescues this person from their inner state of misery? Or in what way are you becoming someone who gets some pleasure in hearing the confessionals of somebody who's talking about their deepest insecurities? There's some voyeuristic way in which something about this is making you feel good. So in the short term, you're wanting to hear all this because you have the unrealistic but very pleasant notion that if you think about it enough, you can help them. And I'm flagging that this is another version of narcissism, that both you and he have narcissism. And when I mean narcissism, I mean you have unrealistic expectations of what can be achieved. There's no magic words you're going to say that going to make him feel okay. There's not like something you're going to say that both you and he are going to do something fantastic with your relationship, that he's going to thank you so much. You'll jump into each other's arms and you'll live happily ever after. But rather, there's a way in which the only thing to say to him is that you find him wonderful and lovely and you're interested in him, but that it's exhausting and tiring to have to assure him of this, and that if he wants to be with you or is interested in you, that's the kind of work he's going to have to do, because you want to be with somebody who's whole and who's together. And in terms of your own self and your own life, it's time to examine your script and figure out the whys in which you want to be this person. What about it makes you feel safe or good or quiet or desirable or smart? Something about it's important to you. And to work that through so you don't stay in this side of the paradigm. The other part, I'm sure y'all know what I'm going to say, is since people seem to play both parts in the script, you should probably look in your own life. Are there people in your own life, whether they're teachers or friends or parents, where you're playing his parts, where you say negative things about yourself, so the other person's forced to say good things about you? One example of this in like teenage girls is there are certain girls who are quite thin who keep on saying, I'm fat, I'm fat, I'm fat. And it's the responsibility of their friend to say, no, you're not, no, you're not, no, you're not. But is there another way in which you keep on saying lousy things about yourself or looking like you have very low self-esteem and sort of forcing the other to say good things about you? I don't know whether it's true or not, but again, that would be you playing both roles of your own internalized scripts. And as happens so often, the ways in which couples happen and relationships form is very often people have many of the same internalized scripts. And I would guess that you and this guy certainly have at least this script, if not others in common. Good luck. I answered your question quite seriously, even though you sound quite young, because you also sound very interested in the way the mind works. And I'm hopeful, again, that this is going to help you out. If you have further questions, we really always love to hear from repeat listeners. Feel free to call back.
Hi, Freudina. I'm a 22-year-old man from Seattle. I was hoping you can help me out with an issue I'm having. I started dating this girl back in November, and we kept it casual for a while. But when March hit and we had to figure out like the shelter-in-place thing, we decided to move in together. Even though it was kind of early for that sort of thing, we were getting along really well, and I figured since we were compatible, it was probably a good call, rather than like living alone during this entire thing. In some ways, it's been really, really great. She's super kind. She's a great roommate. Compassionate, and just really, really fun to be around. Overall, the problem is that like I'm not into her the same way anymore. She keeps on asking me what's wrong because for so many months we were so good together. It was going really, really well, and I can't figure it out because I was really, really into her. I mean, I thought about her all the time. She really is like, I find her so hot, and she's so fun. She's super funny, and I just feel terrible because the last few months I've I've really gotten to know her and as a person, and she's really just great. But for just some reason, I'm just not into her into the same way anymore, and I don't get it. Uh, we've had lots of really intimate experiences in the past couple months, not only sexual but romantic and personal. When we both got either the flu or COVID or something. Obviously, we sheltered in place during that time even more intensely, and it was scary, but it obviously made us closer. And I don't know, but it's yet I still don't feel the same way. Honestly, I can't figure out whether it's time to say goodbye or even what happens. Basically, I'm like totally confused, and my sex drive is basically dead, which makes me feel really bad to begin with. I feel like a bad person. I feel like a bad person. I uh I want I want to be into her, and I know I definitely was into her. I'm not kidding myself. But for some reason I'm not. And I don't want to mess her up in my own confusion and my own, you know, romantic confusion, for lack of a better word. Um, I would really, really appreciate any help, Freudina. Thank you very much.
Now, this is a really interesting one, as the caller is actually unknowingly asking me, Freudina, to enact something with him. He calls up no longer into his own girlfriend and obviously feeling guilty and needing to break up with her. But instead of discussing enactments in his life with others, he's beginning to enact the role of the penitent with me as the confessor. Caller, a special shout out and thank you to you, as from this call we can see the beginnings of how these things are created, which is really helpful. You feel guilty. You clearly need to break up with her and not feel like the bad guy. So you're calling to have me let you off the hook. I hope that's clear to you. The question isn't really the way you frame it. What do I do? Should I stay with her? Should I break up with her? How do I do it? This whole sturm and drang. The question is really, I'm going to break up with her. I feel really terrible about it. And get me off the hook emotionally because I feel really sick to my stomach. So, okay, kudos to you. You're a very decent person. And I'm glad after really sheltering in place with this woman, you feel a sense of responsibility to make sure her feelings aren't hurt. And you're trying to do it in a way that's as least injurious as possible. That's very important. So in terms of the advice department, obviously you're just going to, in a real and rational and safe way, find the easiest exit here because it's my belief once you know you want to go, you should try to be honest and exit as quickly as you can with the least harm. If you're sure you want to leave a relationship, no one wants to look back on it and realize their partner stayed with them for a long period of time, all along knowing that they wanted to go. So here you are. Honesty is the best policy, but best to set up something so you have an actual exit plan and she doesn't get stuck during this period of time sheltering with a guy who she knows wants to leave. So that's the absolute practical plan. In terms of the rest of it pertaining to today's episode with the confessor part of it, caller, I want you to really think about the way in which you are plagued by your own guilt or the way in which you are enacting with me this confessor penitent enactment. Something about you just can't handle that aspect that life is full of causing others pain. And you kind of need someone to say to you, yeah, you got to break up with her. So figure that part of it out. You don't want to be stuck confessing your ills or not able to take on the burdens of things that are very hurtful without the support of others. You want to be a person who feels certain in the kinds of moral decisions you make and able to do the tough stuff with gloves off, with as much kindness and empathy as possible. And judging from the tone of your voice and the way that you framed it, you kind of get that you may really hurt this person. And I'm hoping that your sensitivity and your kindness enables you to do that. And that in the future, when you have really tough stuff to deal with, that you'll know that life is often a series of difficult decisions hurting people you care about, and that it's often more painful not to do it right away with kindness than to let things drag for a while. But it's nice to share the planet with such a good guy. And I'm hoping both you and your soon-to-be ex-girlfriend are doing okay. Feel free to call back at any point if you like. And now it's time for Thoughts from the Couch with my friend, Dr. Michael Singer.
Hello, Dr. Mike. This is Freudina. How are you?
Hey, Freudina. I'm doing pretty well. It's great to hear your voice again. And I've been thinking this week after our previous talks. I've been thinking of the importance of what you do with us, other shrinks. There is something about this COVID situation that has really been depleting for everyone, of course, but I think particularly for those of us who are providers, those of us who give mental health care, who do psychotherapy. It's been very, very difficult. We're talking to all of our patients who are so upset about these things, and we are also very upset about it. But I have to say that you have a way of being so wonderfully real and unsentimentally supportive and showing other therapists, myself included, and this is one of the reasons I'm so grateful to talk to you and for our friendship as well. You have a way of showing how to play even in these difficult times, even in these constrained times. And I don't blush as I'm complimenting you, but it's an aspect of you that I've always seen, a way of really helping other therapists and helping us figure out how we can for ourselves maintain good mental health, good boundaries particularly. And that is something that you do, I know, in your work with your patients. You are real with them, you are playful with them, and I'm specifically thinking of the notion of improv and how do we improvise with our patients. And you have been so wonderful at teaching me and teaching other therapists how to be real in that way that is mutually uplifting and mutually supportive.
I am so amazed by this incredible, volley of supportive, kind, empathic compliments. But this might be the first time in 20 years. What the heck are you on, my friend? Have you been drinking something really good? Is there a new man in your life? I just don't get it.
I was raised on iced coffee. It seemed to be a Long Island thing in the 50s. And so I've given in. And during COVID, I'm treating myself with iced coffee. And I'm realizing all of the things that I have to be grateful for. And to be able to speak as a close friend of Freudina is one of those things that I'm really grateful for. I just want you to know.
Oh my gosh. I'm just so glad I have this on tape, because every time I'm having a day where I'm not feeling great, I'm just going to go back to this and play it and replay it. In fact, I'm going to keep it. So one day when you're not feeling so good about me, I'm going to replay it and replay it. But what do you mean, sir? I am fabulosity in all its manifestations. But thank you for that. Obviously, it's just wonderfully supportive comments, and it's great to have people in your life that make you feel so darn good. I do think that holding on to fun and a sense of play is essential when you're having work with people and helping them live their best lives, so to speak. It's silly way to speak, but in a way, I think it's something that's deeply meaningful. Just helping people to do the best they can with what they got and to rethink what they got. So maybe they have more than they thought or different than they thought. And part of that, of course, is the idea of being able to play with something, to play with an idea, to play full in the way kids are. So they can take an empty soda can and then it becomes, I don't know, something to play football with or something to drink out of or something to make sandcastles out of. But ideas and words and the kinds of interpersonal things you and I talk about all the time are a source of play. To me, actually, the hundreds and hundreds of our colleagues that we've been in touch with over COVID and these periods of time, although it's a little bit better now in New York, there's a resurgence in other parts of the country. But we've seen terrible devastation. And I think one of the hardest parts for me was in all the groups that we're part of where we try to have peer support. We've really heard about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases confidentially with things obscured. But it's been a lot of, what I call vicarious traumatization. The experience of grief felt second and third hand. Mike, if it's okay with you, I just want to say one thing. A colleague of ours, Richard Gartner, who's also a friend, wrote a book called Counter Trauma about 3 years ago, where I wrote a chapter. The chapter I called Why I Don't Watch Scary Movies Anymore. And it's interesting looking back on that chapter, which I haven't been able to reread. But in this book, Richard Gartner basically took, I think, about 25 people who dealt with a lot of trauma and asked them to write a personal narrative about who they are and how they think they've been shaped by hearing about so much grief and so much trauma. And what I ended up writing about was why I don't watch scary movies anymore, meaning why it is that so many of the things in life that seem to be kind of neutral or playful way of dealing with horror didn't have that much appeal. And in following up that article, I guess if I were going to write another article again, I would talk a lot more about what you and I mentioned in a previous episode, which is that I'm now picking up things that have to do with trauma or genocide or pandemics, because the trauma, once again, has become more than what I've absorbed before, and I'm needing to find ways to play with it. Does that make sense to you, or is there another one of these rambling things where you're being tolerant and pleasant?
It does make sense. It does make sense to me in the sense that we have to control our exposure to violence and bad feelings in general, right? We have to be able to manage it better these days, particularly. I don't watch horror movies anymore either. I have to confess. I was never so big on them. They always freaked me out a little bit. But it's been important for me to be able to choose when I'm engaged and to really find ways of playing that are just good for me. And I think, again, that's one of the things that you do really well. And I wanted to mention in that area of your sense of improv and your bringing improv to a group of psychoanalysts recently and helping us to sort of play, because for adults, how do we play except by saying things off the top of our heads, saying unashamedly, saying things to other people, things that are funny, things that are connected, things that are unexpected, and that for me, it was something that was really calming and really fun, and I laughed like crazy, and it was so helpful in terms of feeling replenished.
Oh, that's really great. Yeah, I guess just to explain what you're saying. So I have a friend, Andy Cohn, who's at the Comedy Network, and I was thinking a lot about my life as an improv person and my life in my other lines of work, and the ways in which in improv you can have spontaneity and mutuality and a heck of a lot of fun when even talking about very serious things, and the way in which I felt that work in helping people with their problems or uncover difficulties in past experience and flipping their script, that there was less of that during times of great grief. And I was particularly taken with how many of our colleagues seemed to be grief-struck and not able to play anymore in their own mind. They were just bogged down by so much trauma. And that was my thought, like, how do we get spontaneity back? I'm wondering what you think about how that went, in what way it was freeing or not freeing, or what was it like? What were the exercises like? And how does that help us in terms of our work in helping people do better with difficult times?
Well, for one thing, part of the exercises seem to be how could each of us individually disclose something that normally we wouldn't disclose, but doing it in a welcoming environment of laughter, of supportive laughter.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I said something that after I said it, I was shocked that I had said it because it seemed to be an admission. And I thought, oh no, will people think less of me, or what did I say? But at the time, it felt so freeing to be able to just blurt it out. And so how do you blurt out what's on your mind that is there, that also brings you closer to people in a very, very playful environment? All of the exercises were to generate spontaneous either utterances or responses to an unexpected question that someone else asked, but in a way that was related, but also in a way that was specifically fun. And I would say that most of the responses were greeted with a loving kind of laughter. And I think
we also basically enabled others to shame us, and it didn't happen, right? So in a way, your worst fear in sharing something is that you're going to be shamed by the other, and that it just be agreed in the beginning. That's part of our contract. It's not going to happen. There'll be no shaming here today, sir. So, I guess for myself, that's also freeing. That part of the social contract is you have a space where it's going to work. I guess for me, I'm also thinking a lot about how it would be nice to do that alone with my own head, my own space, to give myself a shame-free zone where I can play with ideas and thoughts myself without judging myself, and how much mental clarity and freedom there then is to play with the kinds of things I might like to think or do or say. And that's a hard thing to do unless you practice.
Well, I think you're so good at doing that with other people that I hope that you're able to give yourself that space too. Because one thing, from knowing you, it's one thing that I know you do with your patients is that you help them create this whole space of where they can do things and say things without shame. And certainly that's happened between us too. When I said at that other time, I had a slip of the tongue and I said girl, and then I said woman, and you were able to point it out to me, but in such an accepting way that I didn't feel the same shame that I might otherwise have felt. And it was a relief.
Yes. Also, I got to make my cooking and baking analogies, and then realize, no, you're precise in cooking too. So, it's good to have friends that are really, really good at things and are really open to hearing all kinds of things and to be able to explore. So it's a certain kind of freedom. Thank you for being that person in my life. It's awesome. And for enabling these kinds of conversations. Next week, I think people were interested in hearing a little bit more about what we talked about in terms of politicalization of the world, and how things are moving between two poles, and our thoughts on that, which of course is obviously what's happening here. So if you don't mind, as a heads up that's the topic. Are you good to go with that?
Sounds great.
Okay, have a great week.
Thanks, Freudina.
Thanks, Dr. Mike.
Hi, Freudina. I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York. I have sort of an ethical quandary. I'm a gay man who's been in a monogamous relationship for nearly 6 years, and being concerned about the coronavirus and its impact on people of color disproportionately, I want to donate blood, but I am not legally allowed to because the FDA says that men who had sex with men, even within a monogamous relationship within the past 3 months, are ineligible, and that you have to abstain for 3 months. I'm unwilling to do that. I guess my question is, what do you think about me going to a blood donation center and just lying? I know that I'm HIV negative. I know that I've been in a monogamous relationship for nearly 6 years. And I know that I want to help my fellow New Yorkers. That's it. Thank you.
Wow, this was a very tough call. It really was. Here we have a rule about blood donations, which I actually find morally reprehensible. But I know nothing about the medical decisions that went into it. It strikes me that during a time of stereotyping of all sorts and us looking into our own prejudices and biases, the blood donation rules, as far as I understand them, really utilize things that have little to do with science and quite a lot to do with prejudices and bias. With that being said, that's what I've understood from what I've read, and I'm certainly not a medical person, and I don't know for sure that there aren't legitimate reasons for this rule. But from what I've read, it doesn't seem to be based in medical fact. So here we have a caller who actually seems so invested in giving blood at a time when we so desperately need it, that he is pushing himself to the limit to try to do that. And he asks for permission, again, in a kind of enactment with me, to violate the rules. So the first thing I guess I think of is how much anger there is, really justifiable anger in the caller who feels that he, more than most people in society, actually wants to be helpful and help save lives. And because of some bias against him, because of his sexual preference, is being stopped in that way. And real anger, and also I think a sense of hopelessness and helplessness and futility in that. And his response to that, of course, is, maybe I should lie. I think that this call is some kind of request for collusion with messing with blood donations, that the caller must sense in me, and probably in many others, the shared sense that we don't really understand this medical ruling and that there's a good chance that it's based in prejudice. So he requests to ask this question to Freudina anonymously, and that's a request of me to be complicit and kind of allow for this in some sense. So we can see how this enactment is a kind of mix in a way. The guy feels justifiably, in my opinion, angry with the rule, but is going to act out and ask for validation from me in a time of medical uncertainty, which is obviously something I would never say yes to, because there are 1,000 reasons that this is a bad idea and a bad plan. And I'm not going to enumerate all the practical ones, but the moral ones are also very difficult here. Before you think I'm inflicting my own moral code on him, look at the fact that he called and his own moral quandaries, that he wants to act out in anger and be justified for it. If you listen to his tone, that's a big part of this call as well. And again, no judgment, because when I say that he's angry, I don't mean that he's justifiably or unjustifiably angry. I mean, probably he is justifiably angry, and probably in that situation, I might feel that way as well. But again, calling and asking for someone to help him enact something or to confess what he's about to do and be let off the hook for it is another kind of enactment. So caller, I would suggest to you that there are probably very good practical reasons not to give blood with this kind of thing going on. It'll lead to problems, as you probably realize, that we can't even foresee. So in a practical way, it's not going to be helpful. There'll be some problem in which this is discovered, or there's some other issues involved, or they may well be some medical issues that you and I are not aware of. I'm not sure. Much more effective way to deal with your justifiable anger is to try to politically make some kind of movement to bring this thing to light. I think you're calling, you said, from a part of the country which is actually very, very foremost in changing these kinds of laws. And my understanding from a bit of research is that they've changed a bit now, and they're the kinds of laws that could change very quickly with the right political pressure applied. And you really seem like the guy to do it, effectively changing the American Red Cross ability to take blood from lots and lots more people at a time that desperately needs it. So in terms of heroics, I think you could be just the guy for it. Should there be the need for such heroics? No. Probably not. I don't really know the issue that well. But when there's wrongs going on, being the person who corrects the wrongs, sometimes, maybe all the time, it takes an angry person to do it. But an angry person who socially and morally got their head on straight. And it sounds, caller, that maybe that's why you called, not only to be thought of as potentially morally being let off the hook for donating blood, but maybe you really called to get the fire in your belly to try to change the societal norms around this. And if so, if that's the thing we're enacting, then I'm delighted to be enacting it with you. Go forth and do it and let me know how it turns out. Thanks so much. I hope you've enjoyed the callers today. I chose a variety of callers that can show us the ways in which we're often implicitly asked to let someone else off the hook, rather than to leave people to grapple with their own sense of having violated some internal sense of morality. There was also one caller who called and asked about someone else's behavior. And I really felt that she, in terms of the professor, needed to look at the pattern in which he was enacting, because it was not clear to her what was going on. I think it's really important that when we hear about these kinds of enactments, that there are very often pulls to react to them in very specific ways, which I haven't yet addressed. So sometimes when something terrible happens to someone, we have an internal feeling to collude with them and to see the aggressor as a victim. Sometimes we see people who were caught up in terrible situations and really awful things happen to them, but they in fact were the criminal who instigated it, and yet bad things happened to them. Oftentimes we forget to see that these people who did criminal activities and really acted awfully were not victims, but that the things that happened to them were because of their own agency and violating ethical norms. Oftentimes therapists fall into this, and sometimes judges or lawyers, where they see the terrible toll that has been enacted on the criminal who suffered greatly after his sins, and some part of them wants to relieve them of the sentence that's being carried out. Oftentimes it's warranted because the person's suffering more than makes sense, but oftentimes it's not. It's just the immediate sense of seeing someone not really being able to see his internal badness because it's just so awful, and watching someone else suffer. Empathic people want to see them as a victim rather than the aggressor who caused all this by murdering someone or something else. So there's this strong urge to rescue sometimes the person who is an aggressor, which grows after what I call an unconscious collusion to deny the scope of the person's aggression and sadism in their ethics violation. This often happens with sexual predators who are released into the community, and people say, oh goodness, he did in fact act terribly sexually towards lots and lots of kids, but you're going to deny him living in a school district forevermore? How will that work? There'll be such limited spaces that he can live in. And yeah, we have a lot of empathic people out there, which is great. But again, I see this as a kind of collusion where we see the aggressor as a kind of victim. But in fact, until we know that society is safe for him, he is in fact someone who is potentially there to harm kids for a very long time until we have the science to support that he's no longer dangerous. So people often blind themselves to the harm that they're causing in order to do what they want to do. I'm pointing at this odd enactment because I think often pedophiles are not rude, terrible, awful, unethical people, but rather very often kind and lovely people who in this one particular way are sadistic and terrifying in that they convince themselves that they're not causing harm to kids, and very often that they're helping kids. And it's because of the self-delusion that they blind themselves to the awful, awful, awful consequences of their actions in order to do what they want to do with children. The same thing happens to those of us who are looking about and are empathic, kind people and see the sadistic acts of pedophiles, but now many years later want to blind ourselves to the fact that recidivism is very high in order to not deny housing and other things to people who've paid their time in many ways. So it's really important to help reintegrate our aggression and their aggression rather than to externalize it onto disciplinary bodies that are dealing with them. You can easily err in being overly empathic or overly punitive. So with the sex offender example, it's very important to set up zones of safety to keep kids safe. But after someone has served their time, it's also important not to be punitive for punitive's sake and to keep former pedophiles from living out their lives. If they're people who are currently in danger of acting out, we cannot allow them access to children in any way. But past that, once people have served their time, being overly punitive and trying to hurt them for the rest of their lives is not an ethical stance, even though it's the way we all may feel. And that would be a very good example of the kinds of ways in which you can be either overly empathic or overly punitive. I'll also point out that when we see people who are, acting out in ways that are just awful, people have a rescue fantasy, which we'll talk about in other episodes. And this is the kind of enactment that happens here when people confess to their sins. Another kind of thing that plays itself out is when you're confessed to, many people have the belief or the enactment profile of feeling like you can rescue someone from doing bad things. And this is often because you have blind spots in precisely the areas that will cause the disaster. So this sense of omnipotence, which sometimes people feel when they hear someone calling them up and feeling so terrible, oh, I can cure you, I can cure you. Those feelings have to be tempered with the recognition that there has to be a collaborative process. So although this sounds very heady and difficult, I'll point out one of the simplest calls we had today was with a girl who has a crush on a boy who seems to have a crush on her. Her sense that she omnipotently can sort of cure him by saying the right magic words is precisely this kind of enactment where one feels that they can be heroic and rescue the other. We are all more mortal or human than otherwise, in the words of Harry Stack Sullivan. And this is one more attempt by me, Freudina, to help you see enactment paradigms that are present in everyday life. This week was really about the penitent and the confessor, in many ways in which we confess terrible things to another and ask them implicitly to absolve us of our sins. And if you kind of look at yourself, and I always like to add this little bit, how is this useful? If you look at yourself and the ways in which you do things that you don't feel good about, what do you do? Do you sit with them yourself? Do you call a friend or a spouse or a parent to talk them over with you, to make you feel better about yourself? And that's perfectly fine and good. But are you also doing the internal work to rectify it yourself and to feel okay about yourself? Being overly punitive with yourself is simply not helpful. Self-flagellation just doesn't work. But having the right moral tone of not feeling okay with it and striving to do better, I guess that's the absolute thing that we're all striving to do. So look for your enactments on both sides and try to flip your scripts. I'm always here to help. You know how to reach me, 212-784-6820. Thanks for joining me this week. If you want some suggestions of things that might be impeding your life and ways to think differently about them, check out Freudina's Brain Hacks. These 5 quick and easy brain hacks will give you some insight into why you do the things you do, so you can start approaching your life with more control and a touch less crazy. Grab them at www.freudina.com /hacks. If you are enjoying the conversations we are having here on Ask Freudina, let me know. Head over to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. The more love we get, the more people we reach. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you in the next episode.